AI isn't making applications and application development any better. This episode of the Tech Field Day podcast features Guy Currier, Jack Poller, Stephen Foskett, and myself, Alastair Cooke, looking at some of the issues around how app dev works with AI and how AI works with app dev, and trying to find out whether app dev is actually being improved by AI. Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, where we bring together a group of IT technical experts to discuss a single idea about key concepts in the industry. This podcast features a variety of perspectives from members of the Tech Field Day delegate community and is often recorded in association with one of our events. Tech Field Day is part of the Futurum Group, and this podcast is also published on our sister company site, TechStrong TV. On this episode, before App Dev Field Day and KubeCon, we'll be discussing the premise that AI doesn't make app dev any better. Before the discussion, let's meet who's on the panel today, starting with Jack.
Hi, I'm Jack Poller. I'm Principal Analyst with Paradigm Technica.
Also joining us is Guy.
Hi, Guy Currier, CTO and VP at Visible Impact, another sister company, and I cover app dev for Futurum Group.
And on the other side of the table, for a beautiful change, is Mr. Foskett.
Hey, Stephen Foskett here. Thank you for doing this. I am very excited to be attending my fourth KubeCon and being part of the delegate panel to some extent for this App Dev Field Day presentations as a bit of I'd say a dabbler practitioner.
And of course, I'm Alastair Cooke. I'm an event lead for Cloud Field Day here at Tech Field Day, part of the Futurum Group. And I've been looking at AI tools and application development together, and we've certainly seen lots of these tools coming out. All of the major cloud providers have their own tools and their own ways of making AI shove itself into software development processes. And there's even other organizations. I just recently spoke with Tab9 who have another AI approach to software development. And we start with really simple things of code hinting as the developers writing something that they know nothing about. And that really resonates with a very simple audience who know nothing about programming and get started with something completely new using AI. But that's not the reality for most professional software developers. Most professional software developers have high skill levels. They understand these tools that they're working with, the APIs that they're working with. They have libraries of pre-written code that address these simple use cases. So what is AI going to do?
Well, I'll start. I think I'm starting from the premise that AI will not make app dev any better, at least not anytime soon, and is definitely not doing it now. What does AI do? Well, really, we're talking about generative AI as a general rule, particularly all the AI integrations into various coding platforms. As well as the management platforms. I don't want to say that AI is not providing any value, but is it making the applications better? I think that it can make coding or deployments more reliable in a certain sense, because AI is like your buddy that'll do some work for you. He's just or she is just a really dumb buddy, and you got to check everything that is produced. But that way, you don't have to start from scratch, or you don't have to scratch your head and look around, or you don't get lost on some, trail of, this looks really interesting. And I never really read about that. And then before you know it, it's the end of the day or the end of the week. So it does make it more reliable. And it also can help you with a certain parts of application development that frankly get overlooked, like proper documentation or annotation, like a good test plan, like a good regression plan. All of these things help, but do they make the application better? I don't think, considering the way generative AI works, which is to simulate additional, trails of words, text, or tokens after an input. Naturally, that is not necessarily going to produce something that's good. It's going to produce something that you can work off of.
There's a couple things you said that I think I want to explore a little bit more. And I think the first and most important to me when I think about AI is there's a huge difference between coding and software development, and really what I consider software engineering, which is the algorithms, the design, and the architecture of the application, and what the application does and how it interacts with the data and with the users. And coding is just such a small part of that. AI can help with the coding, and it can help you solve some of the most common coding errors people make, but it's not making the application better. It's solving that very small portion of translating what the developer wants into something the computer understands. And I think that's the simple part of software engineering and application development.
Yeah, I want to kind of riff a little bit on what Alastair said, sort of characterizing these AI copilots, especially LLMs that are generating output for you. It's not just a really dumb assistant. It's that annoying kid back in school who always raised his hand every time the teacher asked a question and confidently answers the question, sometimes right and sometimes wrong. And the problem with this is that, LLMs very confidently predict what you want them to predict. And often, especially now that the models are getting much better, we've got much bigger models, we've got much finer trained models. I mean, literally the Copilot TM that was trained on GitHub, for example, has a real good understanding of coding style and what you probably are going to be typing soon. It actually does answer the question correctly. But the problem is sometimes it doesn't answer the question correctly. And then, well, what are you going to do? So, I mean, as you know, when I'm using a Copilot feature myself, what I'm always doing is I'm always using it sort of the same way that I use sort of text suggestion on my phone or on the Mac, type ahead. Essentially, what I find is that the Copilot is going to fill out like, oh, I see you're in YAML. I see you probably want to have 4 spaces before the next, thing that you type. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thanks for putting that in there for me. I hate having to type all those 4 spaces. But at the same time, if it like actually puts the parameter and it, like, God help us, the actual data in the YAML, well, a lot of the time that's not going to be the right thing. And it's the same with coding as well. I mean, you're writing a common function that everybody writes all the time. Yeah, it's probably going to fill out the thing correctly. You're doing something novel and interesting. Well, make sure you're looking at it.
There's also a broader point to be made, like along the lines of what Jack was saying, which is what you're trying to do with your app is provide a user experience that uh, you know helps the user do something, helps the organization do something, carries out a function, or even if it's internal, ultimately there is a user experience that you're driving, and that is a breadth of scope in terms of what's going on that generative AI, at least in current models, can't address. So even good code, the right answer, as you put it, coming out, may not have the right kind of a place in that overall system. And if the user experience is not getting better, if you ask me, that's when the application is not getting better and app dev is not getting any better.
So I think a really important element in here, but both Guy and Stephen have hit on, is that the value in app dev is not in knowing the details of the individual APIs. The value is the ability to take that set of data, that set of requirements to deliver some value to our users and turn that into an application. So for AI to be changing things in app dev, and I think it will, it needs to take away the bit of the undifferentiated heavy lifting. It needs to continue to take away the needing to remember what parameters to use, how many spaces or tabs to use, which of those is acceptable in this organization, because again, standards and styles are very organization dependent. For AI to be useful, it needs to take away a lot of that pain from developers of trying to do things the right way and the acceptable way, and allow them more to focus on those higher level values. How am I going to present this data in front of my users? How am I going to solve the problems that the business is actually experiencing right now? I think that's where we get to the change, away from I have to write all these hundreds of lines of code and somewhere in them I've written something wrong, towards what is my business requirement here? What am I going to do to make somebody's life better, somebody's work better, this business better? And that's really what we want from AI in general. We don't want AI to be making art while we're still at work, as the saying is, right? I want the AI to do the boring work and let me do the creative and interesting part. And that has to be where we find that AI is transforming things. And I think we're quite a long way away from that at the moment.
I think we're very far away from that at the moment, because the science, the art and science of software development and software engineering is, and this is what I was saying earlier, is not in the coding, right? It's in understanding the algorithms and the architecture and the implementation and the data structures and how you optimize those tools to develop a solution that meets all of the requirements that your users have. And that's it's very similar to writing prose, text prose in English or poetry. It's, you can give somebody a set of rules, but you can't necessarily create art out of a set of rules. The syntax, right? We can say that the AI is really good at doing syntax and correcting the four spaces or making sure there's a semicolon at the end of every line or whatever it is. And that's a very good developer productivity improvement, right? And it takes that as productivity improvement, but that doesn't necessarily improve the app itself or app development itself if we have our developers lose focus on providing the correct user experience, and if they become too much reliant on AI to do their job and they lose focus on what the app is supposed to be delivering.
There's another aspect of AI too that I think we should talk about, because it's not all copilots. And I think what we're seeing now as well is a lot of companies using AI, well, to do other aspects of app dev, including fuzzing and development, QA testing, automating the software development process with rollouts and all sorts of things. I mean, heck, there was even I don't remember which one it was, but it's doing mouse movements in the IDE on your behalf, so that if you're commonly clicking here, clicking there, it'll watch that and learn that and do that for you. So there are other things that people are using AI for. Unfortunately, some of those things have me a little scared, because essentially, AI can do things that I might not want it to do, against my code. I mean, I could have a situation where it's, like I said, trying to see ways of exploiting or finding weaknesses, finding, buffer overflows and things like that in my code. That's a different aspect of AI that may not be improving the software development process, or honestly, maybe it is improving it. I don't know, Jack. Do you think having AI find exploits in my code is an improvement?
Yes, I actually think that's a very important improvement about it. And I come back at it. My last code development projects were actually developing hardware chips, which you develop a chip in software and you simulate the chip. And part of that is the process is it takes a very long time, because you want to make sure you get it right, because you can't just fix a bug and have a new chip the next day. It's 3 months and many millions of dollars later if you have to go do a revision of a chip. So you write a lot of code to test your chip, and you simulate it with a lot of random inputs. And you want to run those random inputs until you've made sure every line of code and every code path has been executed. And that in and of itself is a very long and arduous process to get right. Having AI be able to do that, or to augment that in some ways, can accelerate that process and improve the development process. Now, I look at that and say, does that makes the development process better? Does it make the application better? That part I'm not sure. It can make it better from a security perspective, because finding buffer overflows before that code gets into production could be very critical to preventing a zero-day exploit. But I security of the code versus the application being better itself, I don't know.
Code analysis is one of the cooler things. Code analysis summaries and annotations is among the cooler things I've seen AI do. But I have to admit that code analysis for security also fills me with some level of terror and dismay, not because of false positives or that sort of thing, so much as because it just seems so easy for the human to just go, well, I've done the analysis, it's done. And that's putting a lot of, so we're talking about your dumb friend, or I don't remember what Stephen said, the four spaces thing, the person in the classroom, whoever it was. Now that know-it-all kid who said, "Oh, yep, the code's safe," or "I found this." It's really when they find that that's the vulnerability right there. You got to take care of that, and then there's something else that gets missed, but you're relying on something to help you through this admittedly tedious task. So that's where I get terrorized and worried.
But I get delighted by some assistance to do tedious tasks, because that lets me do the more challenging, the more interesting, the more useful tasks. My kind of general thinking on this is, if we have a fixed amount of resources to spend on building this application, are we better spending it on all of the tedious processes that are repeatable and automatable in one way or another, whether it's AI or whether it's some other scripting tools, or whether it's not generative AI, but actually predictive AI, or whether it's just straight conventional static code analysis. Are you using this version of this library? Are you using this routine? Are you passing your data? You're validating your data as you come through. I think the thing is that we've got a fixed amount of resource, and where do you want to spend your engineering effort? And I think Jack wants us to spend our engineering effort on making a better application, rather than making the implementation of a poor application better, if you follow the differentiation.
Yeah, I would agree with that, with the caveat that we have to always understand the limitation of our tools. And I think that's what Guy was getting at, is if we have very high confidence that the AI tools are producing valid evaluations of the code, and they're catching all of the possible security issues and all the possible bugs, et cetera, then it's okay to rely on them. If we don't have that high level of confidence, or our confidence is misplaced, then we've got problems. And that's, there's a data analysis question that comes into play there, of how do you analyze and validate your AI is doing the right thing, and at what point does our reliance on AI cause us to lose the ability to understand exactly what we're doing, and whether the AI, to be able to judge the AI as doing the correct things or not.
So I think as we're looking at these tools, one of the things that we see in manufacturing, where we've got an automated manufacturing process, you don't simply accept that everything coming out of that automated manufacturing process is good. You sample it and you audit the results. And so this is an element of, there still is that human requirement to go back and look for something that doesn't make sense, doesn't fit, doesn't work. And so I think there's an important element of just, we need to validate, trust but validate along the way with these automated tools. And Guy, you wanted to leap in?
Well, I think that AI has an obvious and clear benefit. I just don't think it's the higher quality app yet. I don't think it's a better app yet. And that's my sort of stopping point for saying it's not making app dev better. I think this is because application development is a many layered thing, a host of layers. And the user experience, functionality, and so forth is just one of those layers. And when we think about AI improving the productivity of, marketers or knowledge workers or what have you, they're not dealing with many layered issues. A piece of writing is a piece of writing, so to speak, or a picture is a picture. But with app dev, there's so much at play that I think that's why it can still be helpful. It can provide something that's ultimately more robust. But is it better in this sense of, does it do more? Is it more advanced? And that's where I think we're missing for a while what AI can do in app dev.
But I think there's a range of things that AI can do in a software development lifecycle that isn't just about writing the code itself, that's more about the things that surround that code. And we see a lot of value in getting those things right, elements that are useful for integrations and those kinds of elements. And one of the key things that we see through AI, building AI tools and using AI tools is that garbage in, garbage out. You've got to have good quality data coming in order to make these decisions. Often it's you take that generic information that a large language model has and you specialize it to know about your own coding styles, your own language, that very private chip description language, the Verilog that Jack has been writing in order to write chips. This stuff you've got to add. So data becomes really central to all of this.
Yeah, I want to tune in on that because that's one of the things that I've been pretty excited about seeing in the app dev space is companies working on some pretty neat things related to data, not necessarily to the actual act of coding. And this is one way I think that AI is already actually helping me. So let me be specific. Well, philosophically, you guys probably know Postle's law, right? Be conservative in what you send, be liberal in what you accept. And that's one of those things that I encounter all the time when I'm doing any kind of development, any kind of work, is I find that the things that my outputs are always well formatted. If I'm outputting JSON, I make sure I've got everything filled in, et cetera. But the inputs that I'm using are often, let's say, less well formatted. And I spend a lot of time trying to futz around with regex or figuring out a different API that I can use to draw on the data. It's the same when you're talking about databases. A lot of the time now, rather than having very nicely structured databases, you've got a data lake full of random stuff, and you might pull up a fish or you might pull up a boot in your data lake. And it helps to be able to try to get some of that stuff under control. So I've been looking at a bunch of companies that are talking about creating metadata using deep learning AI and also structuring data in a way that's useful. So, for example, I'm already using AI tools to reconstruct data sets as JSON. And I find that actually really, really helps me to know that I'm actually going to be getting the data that I'm looking for coming into the application. And then from there, it's much easier for me to use that data because I have strictly defined keys. What's the title? What's the description? That sort of thing. And all of that input is extremely liberal because basically the LLM is able to take kind of almost any garbage and structure it in such a way that it comes out in a nice format for me to use. And I'm actually pretty excited by that. Now, that application development? I guess in a way it is because it's saving me hours and hours of munging data in order to try to get the right thing. But I guess that's the kind of thing that people forget about or they don't think about when they're talking about using AI in app dev.
Well, I like that concept of, and I've learned that. I always learn that as doing network programming of accept all input and, accept all input even if it's invalid and don't crash on it and always generate correct output. And that flexibility or lack of brittleness would be great if we could use AI to do that, not only in app dev, but also in the applications themselves. So it would be great if people could apply that to web interfaces. So I don't have to sit there and figure out that do I need to put parentheses around my area code when I enter my phone number in this particular website, right? Can the application take my address, regardless of how I put it in, and figure it out without making me, you have my zip code. Do you really need me to enter my state and my country and all the other information that you're asking me to enter? And can you not just grab the data in whatever raw text I give you, throw it to an AI that can analyze that and say, here is the valid, correct format for this application to use without bothering the users? And that sort of understanding of data and cleaning up of the data, that part can not only make the application development better, but can make the apps better as well. And I look at that sort of a 2-for-1 win.
Maybe it's above or over my head. It could be over my head. It's not really my area so much, but you're talking about. I know we're talking about masses and masses, terabytes and terabytes of data that's unstructured. Um, And there's a lot of innovation going on right now in turning those into relational like experiences where you can use SQL, you can do regular queries, you can organize it, all that sort of stuff. So I still feel like we are dependent, Stephen, on the human, in this case, maybe the data scientist, or the human operator or administrator or what have you, to ensure. It's almost like I can see it making things faster. I can see it making things more complete, in partnership with a human.
Well, I'm not saying that you cut the human out of it of course, but I will say that I've been pretty impressed by what's going on here. And so I can't talk about it today, but tomorrow I'm going to talk about it because the product launch is actually tomorrow. But one of the companies was showing me essentially an AI driven, it's an agentic AI based data lake, and they can scale to petabytes and even exabyte scale with arbitrary unstructured data. And they can use basically AI calling AI, calling AI, calling AI agents to scan through, billions of objects, trillions of objects, and structure that in a way that is useful for an application. It is really cool stuff. They also have a self-describing API. So as you hit the API, it responds to you in a way that guides you to what you're actually trying to do with the API. Those things are kind of neat, right? I'm going to say that, kind of, I guess, in summary, back to the premise of this podcast, I think AI can help you in application development. It's just, I think people are so fixated on Copilot, finishing my sentence AI, that they're losing sight of the other cool things that AI can do for you.
My contention for a year and a half at least now has been that AI, generative AI, at least does two things for you. Neither of them improve your productivity. They make you more reliable in the way I described earlier. If you have writer's block, they get you started if writing is what you're doing. And they improve quality because they allow you to do more rounds of review and attention. And I think that's what you're driving at here. Maybe there's a layer here that you're identifying that leads to a better user experience and a better application. It seems a little indirect to me, but it does make sense that if you use better data and you can use more data and you can be more comprehensive, that the outcomes should be better. But that still relies on the human operator, scientist, developer, what have you, to make sure that it happens. So there you go.
So I think we're coming to the conclusion that AI has a place in application development, but it's augmenting humans, not replacing humans. And thank you all for joining us today on the Tech Field Day podcast. Before we go, where can people connect with you and continue the conversation, Guy?
Well, they can find me on Blue Sky at Guy Currier's feed, along with Tech Field Day, which welcome to Blue Sky Tech Field Day. You can also find me on LinkedIn, of course, and at futurumgroup.com.
And Jack, you're not on Futurum. Where do we find you?
I am not on Futurum. You can find me on LinkedIn and on Efficiently Connected.
But of course, Mr. Foskett, where do we find you? Where are the many places we can find Mr. Foskett?
You can find me pretty much every Tuesday on the TechStrong Gang. You'll also find me on Wednesday for the Gestalt IT Rundown, most weeks. And of course, you can find me at S. Foskett on most popular social media sites, including the Mastodons, the Threads, the Blue Skies, and even the X Twitters.
And of course, you can find all of my guests at Dev Field Day and KubeCon this week. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. If you enjoyed the discussion, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast application so you don't miss an episode. And do consider giving us a rating or a nice review. That really helps other people find this awesome content. This podcast was brought to you by Tech Field Day, the home of IT experts from across the enterprise and a part of the Futurum Group. For upcoming events and more episodes, head to techfieldday.com/podcasts or view us on TechStrong TV. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.